Well, hello all. Thanks for joining us and welcome to this joint Harpers Wines of Argentina webinar, The Diversity of Argentina. I'm Andrew Catchpole, editor of Harpers Wine and Spirit, and joining me today, we have an excellent panel, all well-versed in buying and selling Argentina. So first I'm going to let the panel introduce themselves, just say a little bit about where they fit into the trade. And shall we begin with you, Phil, otherwise known as Mr. Argentina? Do you want to explain your role and background? I'm sure pretty much everyone watching will know, but over to you.
Well, I started buying Argentine wines back in 1999 when I think there were only 13 wineries available in the market, and put together a list with all Argentine wines for a restaurant group called Gaucho, and I stayed there for 20 years. Building the category and making Argentina very much a speciality. I've been going backwards and forwards between Argentina and the UK for the last 20 years. We've owned and run vineyards there. We've made our own wines. I'm now with Wines of Argentina, which is a non-profit organization which looks after the interests and promotion and education of wine from Argentina, with around 220 members.
Excellent. What percentage of the trade is that, Phil? Just a quick one.
Argentina?
The members, yeah.
Oh, that's about 95% of all exporting wineries from Argentina.
So near as damn it, close to comprehensive.
Pretty much everybody.
Okay. Fantastic. Nacho, hello, greetings to Hawksmoor.
Hello, yes. Well, my name is Nacho. I've been working in Hawksmoor for well over 10 years now, and as a head sommelier for 6 years. I actually had the fantastic opportunity to work with Phil in 2004 back in Gaucho. So I have learned from Phil from the very early days. That was my introduction to wine. So I know a tiny bit of wines from Argentina, but now in Hawksmoor, Malbec plays a big role. And I'm there, happy to talk about it.
Excellent. Well, thank you. And next up, Peter. Hi, Peter.
Hello. So I'm a former winemaker. I've spent the last 10 years or so, last 12 years living in Spain. I came back to the UK a couple of years ago to be the buyer for Enotria & Co, looking after the Spanish and Latin American portfolio. So obviously the language helps. We look after Grupo Peñaflor, or a number of their agencies in the UK, so a very, very big winery, unlike some of the more boutique stuff that has been sent out. But we also have a family estate in Patagonia and Boca Canales. So between those, we cover off most regionalities. So been a nice voyage of discovery the last couple of years, I can tell you.
I think that's one nice thing about Argentina, is that the large groups tend to make some very, very good high-end wines as well, not just the boutique boys and girls. So that's perhaps something we can touch on. And great, thanks. And hi, Charles. Good to have you on board.
Hiya. Yeah, thanks for having me. So I've been in the wine trade for the last 6 or 7 years or so, buying wine for about 5 years, initially with Majestic. And then I worked for Broadlands, which was my first time buying South American wines, primarily on the sort of bulk, more commercial end of things. And I joined Morrisons at the latter half of last year, and I'm their sourcing manager for South America amongst various other regions. So primarily looking after own label, but also support the buyers on the more branded side of things as well. Been a real sort of voyage of discovery, getting to learn the more sort of premium side of things, particularly what we do around Best, which has been really great to get involved with, and yeah, happy to be here.
Great, fantastic. We'll hear more about those aspects of the side of the trade as well in a moment. And Colin, Vagabond Wines, with your fabulous La Boca backdrop there, we've just noticed. So how are you?
Thanks. Hi. Yeah, Colin from Vagabond, buyer at Vagabond, one of two. I've been with Vagabond since the formation of the company in 2010. Did 10 years of various wine retail and hospitality jobs before that. Unlike the specialists on the panel, I'm a generalist or an everythingist. So I'm really keen to see how Argentina slots in alongside all sorts of trends and things which are going on around the world of wine these days. So this is going to be a really fascinating discussion, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, I hope so, and I think there's certainly a lot we can cram in. So, and Joe, last but far from least, welcome, and just give us a little bit about yourself.
Sure, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. So yeah, I've been at Majestic Wine, so the UK's largest specialist wine retailer, for coming up to about 8 years now. Done a variety of roles, started on the shop floor, but I've been buying kind of for the last 5 years or so. I've naturally kind of inherited quite an Iberian focused portfolio in general, which I'm very happy about. But even kind of prior to working in wine, I also spent quite a lot of time in South America. So I did the kind of classic gap year thing and spent a number of months traveling around South America, including large parts of Argentina. So yeah, really excited to be here and look forward to the discussion.
Fantastic, and it's great to see such a youthful panel. I was going to say, you know, we must add up a lot of years of experience of Argentina between us, but perhaps Phil and I sort of top out the larger share of that. So thanks a lot all for joining us today. Now, why a webinar on the diversity of Argentina? I mean, it's obviously a topic with some pull. We've had comfortably over 200 register for the webinar, so fantastic, that's great, for both the UK and further afield. Well, I think as Argentina's winemaking scene continues to innovate and fast evolve, what we want to look at is how diverse the wine offer has become. I'm not sure that's both within Malbec and beyond that, and also highlight, as some of the wines we looked at pre this session did, the differences, the regional differences, and the differences between the different IGs. I think we'll also look to debate or discuss how best to benefit from this with regard to keeping any given Argentine portfolio exciting, engaging, and up to speed. First, though, to explain a little more to the audience, the panel pre-tasted a selection of Argentine wines to provide a backdrop for the discussion. So Phil is going to briefly talk us through those with the help of a few slides, and then following that, we'll open up the discussion. Please do we'd love it to be interactive, so feel free to fire off questions if you use the Q&A function to keep it simple for me, and we'll endeavour to answer as many as we can. But otherwise, over to you, Phil. Thanks.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Just first of all, I'd like to say a very big thank you to the Embassy of Argentina in London, who helped us get the wines out. I know that all of you in the industry at the moment are, I would imagine, currently experience real problems in getting samples to tastings like this, and it's taken 3 months to get the wines over to here and then out to all of the panelists. So they've been a massive help in doing that, and it's not an easy job. And thankfully, everyone had their wines on time, only just by the skin of our teeth, but so it was. So the way it works is that we communicate with all of the wineries members and ask them if they'd like to take part in this panel discussion. And those that sign up and say yes, send us a list of wines. And then it's my job to curate that, take some wines from their portfolios that they wanted to put forward, bearing in mind that they either going to be taking the wines from the importer in the UK or sending them from Argentina. Most of them were sent from Argentina. And just so that we can look at a very diverse, since the subject is diversity, look at a very diverse set of wines. So first of all, just very quickly, this is a map of Argentina and all the wine regions. And if you look to the right, you'll see that it's split into the north, Cuyo, which is the middle part, making up La Rioja, San Juan and Mendoza provinces, and then down to Patagonia. And over the years, the INV, the National Institute of Viticulture in Argentina, has been forming geographical indications, IGs as they're called, and getting them put on paper and set so that we can look forward to the future in Argentina, both in communicating to our consumers the provenance of the wines, where they're from, and those regional differences, particularly with Malbec, for example, where we have so many regional differences, And I suppose really this is with the view that it's my dying wish that when people go into a wine shop, they're not just going to ask for a bottle of Malbec. They're going to be asking for a bottle of Malbec from Paraque Altamira or Huerta Jari or Los Chacajes. Of course, we're going to have to all learn a little bit of another language before we can do that with fluency. But this is the idea, and I think this is going to be occupying my time until I retire and sit back and drink a few glasses of wine, because this is very important to our future. So we had 9 wines. The first one was from one of the new regions in Argentina. As you know, with Argentina, the Andes Mountains dominates 99% of all the winemaking in Argentina. It is the cooling influence, both the altitude of the vineyards and the latitude of the vineyards. But here, this is a new region where actually there's no influence from the Andes at all. This is based in the Atlantic and in the province of Buenos Aires. Just to give some scope, the province of Buenos Aires is about the size of Western Europe. It's very big, and we have now vineyards being planted that, of course, rely totally on coastal influence for its cooling. So this is very new, and I think this has a very bright future. This is where we're going to find a lot of cool climate varietals being grown, like Chardonnay, Riesling, Sauvignon Blanc, Gewürztraminer, and some Pinot Noir, and there's even Malbec and Cabernet Sauvignon is here. So it's an area where there are, I think it's going to be much more of the white wines and cool climate red varietals as well. And then we go to, this is a rosé. The reason why I chose this is because I wanted to talk a little bit about Argentina's old vines. It's a topic that's been very much in the news. People like Tim Atkin discussing it, and there's this now this group of people who really want to look after these old vines. And Argentina has a lot of old vines that also are under threat from urbanization, and I think it's something that we really need to discuss as to how this forms very much part of the patrimony of Argentina. The next is a Criolla. I think we're going to see a lot of these styles of wines from Argentina. On occasion, I've joked that I'm probably bound to be spending the rest of my life talking about Malbec. And I'm very happy that these wines have come along, because they talk about a time that goes back beyond 20, 25 years. That we all know why Argentina in the UK. And it goes back to a very old time of the first grapes that arrived into the Americas. And there's a lot of interest particularly from young winemakers, but some of the big wineries too, in reviving these varietals, which up until now have been used to make very ordinary table wines for a very big market that is Argentina. Let's not forget that Argentina consumes 75% of everything that it produces. It's still a very big market. And I think these kind of wines are going to be very appealing to the independent sector, I think, and all these very old and indigenous varietals. We know that Criolla Chica is Listan Prieto, which came from the Canary Islands, but there have been a number of great varieties that have spawned from the cross between this varietal and Muscatel de Alejandría. Then we have Cabernet Franc. We've probably talked a lot before about the sudden rise of Cabernet Franc in Argentina. In 2002, there are just over 200 hectares of Cabernet Franc, and now around 1,300 hectares of Cabernet Franc. So in that time, there's been a lot of planting. And one of the reasons why it's been very much favored by vine growers and producers is because of the pricing that they get for the grapes. And they very much form part of the premium category from Argentina. And recently we've seen a number of listings in the supermarkets with Cabernet Franc from Argentina too, which is very encouraging. And then we talk about some of the new regions, Pedernal in San Juan, which is at around 1,500 meters above sea level. I think this is a very exciting region. It's something that is quite unlike the northern regions of Argentina, where we see quite big and intense and bold wines, and some of the high parts of Mendoza, in the Uco Valley, for example, but this is a very new region and it has a characteristic of its own. And it's a lot of investment and a lot of planting going on here. And I think there's a huge future for it. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about value for money. Wines that come from Valtajarí is now being very much seen as a kind of Grand Cru area. And to get a wine from here for 12 quid, this kind of quality of fruit, it just goes to show it's not just given over to these very high-end wines that are all scoring, 100 points from this part of the Uco Valley. There are people making really good value for money wines at a very accessible price here as well. So I think that's something that's worth discussing. And then you've got some of the big guys like Trivento, of course, who are very big in the UK market. They have the #1 selling Malbec. Also going into making single vineyard, single region wines. I think that's one of the questions that you asked beforehand, Andrew, was do we see that the premium category for Argentina is going to be much more towards single region and single vineyard wines? Well, we can discuss that, but this is part of a move that for many years that the big wineries have been in many ways leading in trying to put to the front to the consumer the idea that it's not just Malbec, it's Malbec from here or there. Again, this is from the Uco Valley. Again, we're talking about value for money wines that are in the market that sell pretty big volumes. And of course, this is also about the French being involved in winemaking in Argentina. It's not just an Argentinian thing, but the influence that we get from France, Italy, Spain, and all around the world. And then lastly, organics, biodynamics. We've seen a number of bigger wineries, particularly these guys, are now moving into total organic viticulture. It's a move that many of the wineries are now making very quickly. As the buyers will know that many of the vine growers and the wineries work in organic protocols anyway. It's not so difficult to make organic wine in Argentina as it in some other areas. And there's a big move towards organic. I think there's a real realization on the part of the industry that this is going to be something that is going to tempt more buyers in the future. So that's all 9 wines.
Excellent, thanks, Phil. And I think I just wanted to ask, get a general feel from the panel in a second, actually, about what they made of the wines, how well they showed diversity and stuff. But first off, I wanted to just pop a quick question in on Malbec. Why, just in the words of sort of 2 or 3 of you, why is Malbec so enduringly popular? I mean, it's just been a hit it just keeps giving and giving and giving. And now, of course, part of what we're discussing today is the way that, it's diversifying and has been for a while and so on. But who'd like to pick up on that? I mean, or should I pick on someone?
I don't mind having a go, Andrew.
Yeah, Joe.
Yeah, no, I can contribute. Yeah.
I think for me the big thing from a customer perspective is the kind of tannin angle. I mean, having cut my teeth on the shop floor, it's amazing how many kind of new customers to the wine category kind of want recommendations for what they'd class as kind of smoother wines, which really means kind of softer or riper tannin varietals. And I think for me that is one of the reasons why so many kind of new customers to wine or to the Argentina category taste Malbec and come back for it. I think there's a few other factors as well. I think the pronounceability of the varietal is really important. And probably as well the relationship with food. So I think the steak or barbecue angle kind of resonates pretty well around most of the globe, but particularly in the UK. So those would be the 3 sort of call outs from me, I think.
Yeah, and of course, there's been such a sort of trend towards. We've seen it with Nacho, you're nodding, but the steakhouses and sort of grilled or flame cooked food and so on. And it's I think that's obviously been a big thing, and that kicked off in the States before it kicked off here. It's just quickly. Is there anyone else that wants to add any sort of further points about? Yeah, Nacho.
I will add just one more thing. I agree with everything that Joe said. But the one more thing is, to me, Malbec seems to be reliable. we do talk about vintage variation and how they will be reflected on the wine, but it's always reliable, and you never get a bad vintage, so to speak. So also affordable, can be affordable as well, reliable and affordable.
So your
as well.
chance of a bang for your buck is very, very high, and that can't be said with wines from every region in the world. So I think that's across the price bands. Great. Okay.
I'll just add one more.
Sorry,
thing.
Andrew.
Yeah, of course. Yes.
I think it's largely in a similar way with what Marlborough has done with Sauv Blanc. It's the aromatic profile of the wine, and it's so sort of perfumed and fruit driven. And I think that really appeals with customers, certainly in the UK, and that's a big reason behind its appeal. It's just easy to understand.
Yeah, it won't cause offence as well. It's not like other varieties that are high in pyridine or something, where maybe you get a greenness or something which you're either going to love or hate. The tannins are soft enough that they're not going to put anyone off. It's reliable. Yeah, absolutely. I think it appeals to most palates, I think.
I was on a train, but back when we could get on a train, I was on a train before lockdown. I remember there were 3 people on the train. They had 3 bottles of wine from a well-known supermarket, and they were drinking during the course of the journey. It was quite a long journey, and they finished with a bottle of Malbec, and they were discussing amongst themselves. I was earwigging what they were saying. It was fascinating, and they were saying, "Listen, you just can't go wrong with a Malbec," and it's like a warm hug. I mean, it's something that is very familiar. It's very comforting. And I would imagine it's done very well during the pandemic, just precisely because of that, because it's something that you know it well. It's very comforting. You know that it's not going to let you down. And as Nacho quite rightly said, it is so reliable as a great variety.
It's reminds me, from about in this country, in the UK, from about mid-August until perhaps mid-July the following year, it's the kind of wine that keeps the cold and damp out and makes you feel a little more summery inside, doesn't it? So, but yeah, that's I think really good points. I think that's just a good place to start, just to say, what is this enduring appeal of Malbec? So we'll come right back to Malbec in a second, but I just wanted to look quickly at the wines. I suppose we could have done this first, but general impressions across the wines that we tried, and not so much to pick up on any individual wines. I mean, I thought it was a fantastic flight of wines. What did it do in terms of diversity across the varieties? We saw. I mean, it's really fascinating seeing coastal Chardonnay, which come across before. Cabernet Franc, I agree, is real hit out of Argentina when it hits. And then obviously a selection of Malbecs. Anyone like to kick off? I mean, Colin, what were your thoughts? Was it representative of what we're looking to discuss? What do you draw from it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously there's a lot of Malbec. I mean, for me, I loved the very first 2 wines that I had, which was the Chardonnay, and then the Cabernet Franc. Now that might just be the sort of French bias in me slightly. But yeah, I thought that Chardonnay was just amazingly fresh, and I feel it's really interesting hearing you say about this cool area where all these kind of these sort of finesse-styled wines might be originating from in the future. And it being close to Buenos Aires, I'm sort of mystified why this land wasn't developed before for viticulture, and why they had to go all the way out inland to Mendoza for it. But that Chardonnay was a real surprise, and I was like, well, if that's the first wine of the day, hey, this is going to be a good one. And the Cab Franc, for me, beautiful. Just hit. I was amazed when I saw it said 15% alcohol on it, because that was completely hidden. The other thing was the complete absence of me writing down anything at all about oak in any of these wines. And they really seem to have got that precision and focus and the balance of all the elements in the right sort of combination now for just general drinking, and great more I don't know, some more finesse, I guess, is the style in all of these.
Yeah, does anyone want to add to that? Is there any others that people would pick out, or the diversity in the Malbecs, or
the price range? I think it was well mentioned on 3 of them. The value for money is certainly there. I think there's good variety. I would have liked to see some wines from Patagonia, for example, or other varieties. But I think it's a very handsome group of bottles nonetheless. And I was very, very excited about the Criolla actually. I have tried only a couple before, have never come across Azteco, and I was really happy that it showed up. And to me, I quite like the wine. I like the expression of it.
Yeah,
I was just going to say, like other wine regions, it shows the rewards you get when you step out from the comfort zone, if you like. And it's, there are other regions as well that have this curse whereby, they're associated with one varietal. And, in the on-trade, especially if you go to a restaurant and you're creating a list, you've got a gap for Argentina, it will be a Malbec. But actually, when you step away from that and you look at a Cabernet or, like I say, a Crozier or whatever it might be, you can find some incredible value. And it's one thing that I always stick by. If someone's looking for a varietal Cabernet, for example, line them up from around the world, and you probably won't get better than a good Salta Cabernet, for the money. So yeah, very interesting.
Yeah, what's interesting about that Criolla is, like many of the wineries that are beginning to bring back this varietal, is that they're actually doing a lot of trial and error with the way they get these. No one's made Criolla like this before. If they did, they probably did it 300 years ago. And so they're trying to get to grips with making small amounts of high quality Criolla, where in the past it's been huge amounts of low quality for the domestic market. So there's a lot of this actually goes back to also keeping the patrimony and the past of Argentina alive. I think what they want to do is they want to show people that this is a great variety that not only has a huge amount of history, but has a huge amount of potential in the future. And El Azteco in the north of Argentina, I think, have done a great job with this. And I remember the first 3 vintages of this wine, there was a lot of difference between them because they were trying to find their way. And I think with this wine, this particular vintage, they've definitely found it. And I think there's a lot of potential for that. And this is not just Criolla Chica, but Criolla Grand, Cereza, Molocano, all these great varieties that have such a long history and were born in Argentina, and have adapted to the climate of Argentina better than all the others, in my view, because they've been grown in hot areas for 300-400 years. And so, they are perfectly suited to the terroir.
It's also on trend as well, isn't it? We'll get to the future a bit later on, but consumer is after a lighter, forward style of wine, and something like the Criollo is that. But also aficionados, they're looking for these sort of whole bunch press, lighter style reds and more sort of natural wines, if you like. So it's a lovely point of difference and a way forward, definitely.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I think we'll definitely come on to exploring how wines like that, which again I thought absolutely fabulous and really stood out for me too. Just so eminently drinkable. Can help to shed a light on sort of growing diversity. But I think, Phil, when we spoke a little bit earlier, we were talking about exciting things going on, and perhaps not always, but sometimes younger winemakers, different generations coming through, exploring, seeing what you've got sort of heritage wise and stuff, and actually really beginning to wake up and use that. And obviously it's a process that's been going on. But I guess it then leads into my next question, which is a 2-parter, and perhaps we focus on Malbec initially, and then on the broader range of varieties that are coming out of Argentina secondly. And rather than asking whether the consumer is kind of up to speed with the diversity in Argentina, is the trade really up to speed in terms of reflecting Malbec's diversity? And then leading and engaging the consumer, or does more work need to be done there? I mean, looking at the wines we've looked at, what's your sense as sort of suppliers to and retailers on and off trade as to whether the message about Malbec, the evolution of styles of Malbec, is really getting through? Who'd like to pick that up? Should we do sort of on trade, off trade, or maybe we'll begin with Morrisons with you, Charles? What's from the front line of a multiple retailer?
Well, we've been trying to reflect what's happening on the ground with our range as much as possible. And I think one of the key things that we've done over the last few years was to bring in the style of wine that we have for our premium tier of Own Label the Best, which is a very lightly oaked version, very reminiscent of the wines that we tasted before this webinar, in that the focus is on purity of fruit. and drinkability above oak aging, which is sort of, it is definitely a trend that we've seen more and more demand for and is reflected across the range. Whether there's the appetite for the level of regionality that we've seen from this tasting at a grocery level, at the moment, I would question. I think that's more got to come from the on-trade before it can start being repeated in the off-trade. But it's something we're definitely trying to profligate with our customers.
So would the on-trade like to pick that up if say?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, Colin. Mm-hmm.
Colin, or shall I jump in?
Sorry, I missed who was speaking then. Who jumped in first?
I'll happily go. I'm just
great.
About it. So I think there's a huge amount more work needs to be done, and that's even the people on the ground that are selling the stuff. You know, we've undergone a few masterclasses now with our team, just touching on regionality. So just saying, you know, Maipu, Kuhan, these are the oldest vines. You know, lower level, we look at Uco and say, you know, this is the higher altitude vineyards. We're then trying to delve deep into Guataljari and these sorts of places, but it's quite tricky. And I think one of the issues, so you know, to come from the other side of this, is for me the issue is that when you think of Argentina, you know, the distance from Patagonia to Salta, it's, you know, thousands of miles. It's like from Manchester to Marrakesh. It's a huge span of land. And if you were to take a different varietal, so a Cabernet, for example, and look at how Cabernet varies over such a huge disperse of climates and soil types, you would find immensely different wines. Whereas I think Malbec is a little bit more forgiving. So actually, whilst there is difference between a Patagonian Malbec and a Salta Malbec, the difference will be much less marked than maybe a Salta Cabernet, and if I don't know of any Patagonian Cabernets at all, actually.
There is.
There will be some, and I'm sure the difference will be chalk and cheese, whereas I think Malbec is a little bit more forgiving. And it sort of also falls under this regional reliability thing as well, whereby I think people find that Malbec is so reliable, trying to engage them and get them to trade up, whether that's by adding value with regionality or what, is actually a bit more difficult. Whereas with other varietals, other regions, it's a bit easier. So do you see the double-edged sword that I'm trying to make? You know, it's both a good thing and because Malbec is so forgiving, I think that actually makes it a little bit more difficult. But it adds huge amounts of value. When our guys now go in and talk about regionality, it really helps. And the other point, you know, Charles, not Charles, but we've had several tenders from other supermarkets come in where they want a Malbec. And what do they want? Well, they want a South African Malbec, or they want a Chilean Malbec. And of course, this is going to be the big fight for Argentina, I think, is going forward. Malbec in itself will be the category at a consumer level. And so I would argue that Wines of Argentina, if they're to do anything, it's to engage the consumer, not the trade, and actually make much more of a song and dance about this regionality, because otherwise they're going to get lost into it, and it will be a race to the bottom for the end consumer, because they'll be finding very, very cheap Malbec on the market. I think typicity will disappear in a lot of that, and that would just be, you know, disastrous, I think. So
just to pick up on that point.
Yeah,
one of our best-selling Malbecs is actually a Cahors. It's not Argentinian at all.
Yeah, absolutely.
Your point is very valid, that the brand is more Malbec than it is Argentina. Argentina are the leaders at the moment in Malbec, arguably. But the brand is an Argentinian Malbec, and I was actually really pleased to see some different wines from coastal regions and people trying to experiment with different varietals. I think the key to success long-term for Argentina is going to be diversifying beyond Malbec, because otherwise I think that there's a real risk that it could become the next Germany or Sherry, and Malbec falls out of fashion for whatever reason, and it just sort of disappears from the UK, which would be a real shame.
But could I just make doesn't that fall with you guys? To some extent, it falls to you to be also maybe. Let me just ask a question. If you had the option to put a Malbec from Luján de Cuyo and a Malbec from the Uco Valley and put them both on the same shelf, would you?
Yeah, if the sales could justify it, then we would. I think it's a joint effort really to educate the consumer from both fronts as to the benefits of the various different regions.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So I've just got, we've got, you know, Chile piling in with Malbec and so on. So that's one of the dangers to beware for Argentina. And also I took on board, I think, Peter, you were making the point earlier, forgive me if it's you, Charles, that if you're delivering really satisfying juice to customers at a reasonable price level, then that can also take away some of the impetus to trade up if you're still getting a lot of bang for your buck, you know, at 10 quid, why would you spend 20 or 25 or 30? So that's a potential pitfall. Phil, any comment on that?
Well, let's just remember, if you're talking about the off trade, Argentina, yes, I completely agree with Charles and Peter that there could be this race to the bottom, but Argentina commands a higher price for its Malbec, I would imagine, and I don't know this for sure, than Cahors or Chile. I mean, it is a premium. It's still considered to be a premium product. And that's, for me, where we make this more premium and where we make those differentiations is not the differentiation between Cahors or South Africa and Argentina. For me, the future lies with the differentiation of the regions within Argentina to express Malbec in a different way. I think sometimes we are in danger of underestimating the consumer at a supermarket level. I think if the consumer is educated properly with the way in which their wines are sold, I think there's every opportunity that you could have 3 Malbecs that are under an own label from Argentina that show those regions in terms of, well, labeling is very important. The packaging of that's very important. But if your consumer goes into a supermarket, has a choice of 3 Malbecs, one from Patagonia, one from Mendoza, one from Salta, for example, I think that's a way of leading the consumer to maybe thinking, okay, well, I'll buy this one. Maybe next week I'll buy that one and see what the differences are, or maybe take it to around to someone's house and do a little tasting with your friends or whatever. I think yes, there is the idea that there is a race to the bottom, but we don't have to do that. We can do it a different way. We can do it a way in which makes it more engaging for the consumer.
Well, the good news, Phil, is it's working in the trade. As I say, that the response we've had to our Argentina masterclasses about regionality that we've done have been really well received, and we can get that to the gatekeepers, so the sommeliers and the buyers and everything else. But yeah, it's at a consumer level that needs to really happen as well. I think, if we are going to try and premiumize the category.
Yeah, I guess, you know, a category is working in an otherwise, if we rewind pre-pandemic, an otherwise flat wine market, then my goodness, surely it makes sense to work at it too. You know, it's right. I haven't forgotten you on trade. You're all sitting on the right of my screen. I'm not sure if it's the same for everyone out there, but what's going on with Malbec and Argentina more generally on wine lists in your experience? And Colin, I recognise you straddle sort of on and off sales, but we'll describe you Vagabond as wine bars for the moment. That's great. So should we start with Vagabond and then move on to the more sort of specialist, perhaps Hawksmoor? So what generally is what had been happening in normal times with Argentina up until the end of, say, 2019?
It was booming.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it was an easy sell for us, and it was a you know, it's not a difficult business decision to say we ought to have some Malbec on the shelf, and we can make quite a good living from selling lots of Malbec because people are happy to pay for it. So, you know, from a business point of view, there's every reason to have that there, and you know, we would get the premium if we decided to charge it as well for those wines. So within me, there's always a resistance to popularity. It seems to have been the thing in my entire life. You know, even when I was an 8-year-old kid, I hated what was #1 in the charts and stuff. So you know, whatever it was that became popular, I wanted to be on to the next thing. So I'm quintessential wine trade buyer in that regard. So I'm always looking for something else. But I have to go. Yeah, there's the comfort blanket angle that Phil mentioned. Oh well, various of us have mentioned here, the reliability. So yeah, those are key things, and those are really super critical at times when, you know, the last year where people have thought, you know, what is reliable and what makes you feel good. Then yeah, that's where Malbec has sat for me in the past year. Just interesting, while I was writing down all my notes before I came on, I started to think that some of this regionality stuff was a bit like writing a letter to the vineyard. You know, when you're writing down the single vineyard, single subzone, within the valley, within the region. And it made me think that actually that's maybe a way to communicate to people that this is what the diversity of Argentina is about. Is when you buy this thing, you're effectively writing a letter. You're receiving a letter from an individual address in a way, and you're not just buying the whole country. You are going to a specific place with what you've got in the glass, and that's you know, that's something I would like to be able to communicate to people a little more as well.
And is that something that's possible to do? I mean, obviously you have your aromatics, you also have your staff, you also talk a little bit about the wines on the shelves if people are taking away. So you've got all those different means, but is that, can you make that really impactful and a hit? I mean, obviously you've got to think about the trade. It's always so segmented in terms of what consumers are buying where. So you probably have, to a degree, a certain profile of Vagabond customer that's interested. Otherwise, they're going to be a little bit scared off anyway. So let's say they're perhaps above average of interest in wine. So, but you can use that impactfully and say, right, this is really different because it's from there. It's like a love letter from the soils of X, Y, or Z. Yeah, and that works. Yeah. Natural. Sorry. Yeah. Someone wants to jump in, but
I just say I love that analogy. That's great, Andrew.
It's a great analogy.
Okay, I'll have to use that in a subsequent write-up as well. But Nacho, you seem to be, I mean, I know Hawksmoor's food, and you seem to be in a pretty natural environment, especially for Malbec, I would say sort of Cab Francs and so on. But what have you seen sort of evolution change over time in terms of the complexity of differences that the customers are willing to engage in, or do they keep coming back to sort of like your best-selling Malbec on the list?
Unfortunately, I think the majority of customers not only have Malbec as the one thing they want, the other thing they want is Mendoza. I think Mendoza works as a brand or sub-brand of Malbec as well, because I have tried many different things. A lot of Malbec is sold in Hawksmoor, and I have tried having different Malbecs at different price points to show different characteristics. So clearly regionality is something that I have used in the past. And yeah, having a Malbec from Salta, which is the richest, the most powerful, the heaviest, but at a different price point, of course. And I've also tried having something that is not Malbec. I remember trying a Carignan from Mendoza, and people would order it just because it was Mendoza. And then they would realize it's not a Malbec, but they would still have it. So I think the customer in a restaurant, and depending on the restaurant, is different to a customer in a shop. Sometimes they just don't want to talk to you. Sometimes they just don't care. They don't want to learn. Some people do engage, and some people ask, why do you have 3 Malbecs at different price points? What's the difference? I'm looking for this style. Which one of them are more suitable? And also, other thing we've tried is age. We are always used to having very young Malbecs, the current release, the latest vintage. But we have listed some old Malbecs, and they're very different to what people normally go for. So again, you have to warn people, have you had an old Malbec before? It's not your youthful, floral, quite plummy wine. So I would say some customers are interested, but the majority, they just want a Malbec or a Mendoza, or both, which is a shame. Sometimes they just don't want to speak to me.
Sure. Okay. It's interesting. We've had I just had a comment I'll throw in from Solano Pena. Hi, Solano out there. And he's basically just saying, you know, can we all aim for Argentina to become, for Malbec, what Burgundy is for Pinot Noir? So to, you know, I mean, Phil, what's your opinion? Is it going to be a definitive yes that we could end up there some way down the future? Because, I mean, if you compare Argentina in terms of its perception on export markets, it's a very short way down the wine producing journey compared with where Burgundy's got to in terms of maturity, right? I think that's a fair thing to say.
Well, just if you consider that we've done everything in 20 years.
Yeah.
Where we are now, nearly 4% of the market has been done in 20 years, which is remarkable given the economic situation in Argentina, the problems that they have to go through just in terms of logistics, and they're not as well set up as many of the European countries or North America in doing what they do. It's remarkable what they've managed to achieve. So I'm very, very hopeful that yes, Malbec can be, Argentina and Malbec can be to what Pinot Noir is in Burgundy. I mean, Argentina is making the best Malbecs in the world. I don't think there's anybody that could say that could argue with that. It's something that they really concentrate on. It's their grape. It's something that's really only been in the consciousness of wine producers in the last 20, 25 years. Before that, it was a number of different grape varieties. Someone took the decision 25 years ago that we're going to go with Malbec, and look what they've done. So I'm very confident that this will be the case, and I take Nacho's point in that sometimes people are not interested. I've walked a restaurant floor for 20 years, so I know what it's like to try and engage people. But there was a huge amount of engagement when I was at Gaucho in looking at the regionality. It was the way I set out the list, the way in which I taught my staff. I had 1,500 of them to show those differences, and thank God we only really focus on Argentina, because it would have been a nightmare if we'd been doing the whole of the rest of the world. But people really bought into it, and we were quite, we were very aggressive in the way in which we tried to talk about Argentina and its diversity to our customers. It was ingrained in the culture. So I do think that once you start going up into premium single vineyards from some of the well-known wineries, you're getting to great. You can spend a lot of money, but you're still going to be spending less money than you would do anywhere else with wines of that quality. And this is where Argentina really wins out for me. You can have sublime Malbecs that you will pay in a restaurant less than £100 for. You probably can't do that with Burgundy, with that same kind of, the very top end of Burgundy is inaccessible to most people, whereas the very top end of Argentina and Malbec is still accessible to people who might want to push the boat out a little bit. So I think that's where Argentina really delivers.
I think that's a really good point. And we've looked a little at and as you say, such sort of early days in terms of the development of the industry. So the crystallizing out of IGs, we've talked a lot about regions, and obviously IGs within regions. We haven't really spoken much about those sort of single site wines. So Joe, on a sort of Majestic customer sort of level, a bracket, are you dealing much with? Do you have much success if you're looking at sort of single site, single vineyard, that higher end, and is that a powerful cue to help pull customers up? What's your thought on that? Are we still a little early in the process, or is it evolving?
I think single vineyard is a premium cue that customers have an association with for quality. I think outside of that, though, there's probably potentially some slightly more powerful marketing tools with Argentina specifically. So altitude being the main one. Of course, with Argentina, it's all relative. Given that flat plantings, in the most part, outside of new coastal regions, start in Mendoza at sort of 900 meters plus. But demonstrating to customers the difference in style and quality between a 900 meter altitude wine and a 1500 meter plus can sometimes be quite useful. Equally, we've talked about organic as well, and I think that's another great way that we can look to kind of premiumize the category, because along with kind of other foodstuffs, I think customers do expect to pay a bit more of a premium for those wines. And then I think kind of coming more specifically back to the GI question and the kind of dichotomy between trade knowledge and customer knowledge, I think, with the fantastic selection of wines that we had before this discussion, particularly with the Malbecs, I think us as a panel and the trade more kind of broadly would have been able to pick out the differences, say, in a Malbec from Altamira that might have a more floral character, or Gualtagerie that might be more mineral. But I do kind of agree with, I think it was Nacho that made the point that actually for most consumers, Mendoza is kind of the only other association with Argentina outside of Malbec at this present time. So I still do think there is a lot to be done. And obviously us as a specialist, we want to play a big part in that to kind of continue to educate customers on that front. Yeah,
okay. We had a question, which I think I'll throw in here as well, from Sanavan, forgive me, San, I'll try and pronounce your name correctly, Van Herwaarden. With costs of wine rising very fast in some new world countries like Australia and New Zealand, Sana asks, should there not be an opportunity for other varietals such as classic Cabernet and Chardonnay from Argentina that offers superb value, that value you've already talked about, Phil, and something different and comparable? So we talked about Malbec standing up really well, especially at those higher levels. You're getting such quality for the pound you're paying. What about other varieties coming out? I mean, there are some fantastic Cabernets. I'm particularly impressed with some of the Cabernet Malbec, and that's Cabernet Franc and Sauvignon and Malbec blends I've seen, which I think are absolutely world class. We've looked at, you know, I can't quite reach the bottle where I'm sitting, but the coastal Chardonnay we've looked at, which was absolutely lovely wine. We've got Cabernet Franc coming out. What of all this, and how does that work? Sort of, especially at the sort of mid to higher points on a given list. I mean, Joe, shall I stick with you for a second? What about that breadth, and then we'll come on to some of the on-trade and suppliers.
Yeah, I fully agree with the rest of the panel on the Chardonnay. For me, I think it's really interesting to kind of look east, so to speak, with the category, and you know, taste wines that are coastal from Argentina, instead of, you know, as Phil said, the vast majority of samples kind of coming out of the Andes region. But I think more broadly as well, Chardonnay represents a really amazing opportunity and commercial opportunity as well. I think a lot gets made of Cabernet Franc, and rightly so. Plantings have increased, although still fairly small overall. But I think most retailers would probably say that Cabernet Franc is typically a bit of a tougher sell stylistically. And for me, it's always an interesting one that, you know, Argentina doesn't necessarily have a standout white varietal. Yes, there's Torrontés, but we know that tends to be quite divisive with, you know, those that love it and those that really don't. And obviously we didn't have a Torrontés in the tasting earlier. But I think Argentina has so many of the kind of raw ingredients to make a big success out of Chardonnay. So obviously within the UK Valley, you've got, you know, an abundance of complex alluvial soils. You've got the altitude factor that I've talked about as well. Obviously that results in cooler climate and slower ripening periods, which is all kind of ideal environmental factors for Chardonnay. And I think there's a really, really big opportunity with that varietal. And I think, you know, adding the coastal factor in as well with the wine that we tasted for this session, I think just proves that even more for me.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We've had a couple of comments / questions about Torrontés, and I think which you've just touched on. I mean, I think my sense of Torrontés is that it's a fantastic addition to Argentina's portfolio, but it's and shout me down, Phil, or anyone if you feel I'm wrong. But
oh, don't worry, I will.
It's I know you will. it's very likely to remain quite niche, and there's a little bit of Marmite factor about it as well, I think. So, say an absolutely fantastic thing to have in the overall armory. But it's I mean, okay. There's a quick show of hands. Anyone think that would be should stand up aside Malbec as you know, a best foot forward on the white front, or do you think it's better to keep that for a more specialist? You do, Phil. Okay, that's.
I do. It's indigenous to Argentina. It's something that is it's emblematic. It is the quality, and I think all the panel here who have tasted through Torrontés, whether you like them or not, the quality of Torrontés from Argentina in the last few years is amazing. And the great thing about Torrontés, it's very versatile. You can make highly floral character from Salta in the north. You can make wines a little bit more muted and perhaps a little bit better value for money from La Rioja. And then there are areas in the UK Valley now that they're planting Torrontés on, particularly on calcium carbonates, soils that are very high in calcium carbonates, that take it to almost a kind of Riesling level of complexity. And so I think, and also there's orange wines being made with it, and blends also. I think it's the when you're blending it with Sauvignon and Semillon and Chenin Blanc, it's fantastic. And I think there's a great potential. I know that, you know, before the pandemic, when I was doing trade shows and standing and tasting wines with consumers, what really surprised me, I went up to Scotland a few times in 19, and people were asking for Torrontés. So I think there is an appetite for it. It's a fantastic wine to go with food, particularly Asian food. You know, if I go into an Asian restaurant and if they haven't got a Torrontés, I'm always asking to see the manager at the end. It's a great food wine, and I just think there's so much more potential for Torrontés and Argentina, and I think we will get there. I think it's going to take a little bit of time, but I think we will get there. And it's always great value for money. It's not a great variety that commands huge prices, silly prices. It's you know, almost like a, you know, for under a tenner, almost everybody, all the supermarket groups are doing a Torrontés. It's around a tenner or under a tenner. I think it's a very expressive grape. And I think more people like it now because perhaps these are the same people that would be drinking Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand. It's you know, it's much fresher. It's got better acidity. It's less rustic than it used to be. Very clean and pure, and it's a very unique expression, and it's a very expressive grape. So I think there's a huge amount of potential for it. I really do. And I've tasted a few examples recently that take it to another level in terms of complexity. There's some orange wines that are being made. If you taste some of the experimental Torrontés wines that have been made from Mendoza, for example, by some of the top wineries, the wines are absolutely fantastic.
I haven't quite got that far actually, but I've tasted some quite exquisite Torrontés, and yeah, I mean there are some fabulous Torrontés out there. It's yeah. So, but thanks for that very sort of passionate support of one of Argentina's truly unique kind of varieties. It really is unique to Argentina.
I do agree with Joe about Chardonnay. I think, you know, if you taste across the portfolios of most of the wineries in Argentina, they're offering Chardonnay. It's a very different beast to what it was 10 years ago. It's much more delicate. There's a lot more planting of Chardonnay vines on, we're at 6,000 hectares now, on chalky soils, you know, higher up into the valleys, almost kind of Burgundian temperatures. I think it's a fantastic. Also Semillon and Chenin Blanc, you know, these are two heritage varietals for Argentina too.
Well, just to come in there, Phil, so Lawrence Webster out there in our audience, our lovely audience, said, would you agree that white wines have a big part to play in Argentina's future? We've seen, he says, incredible progress in recent years. So we've been talking Chardonnay, we've been talking Torrontés, we've mentioned, of course, you know, there are Mendel kind of Semillons, wines like that. I'm not sure there's that much Semillon there though, is there? But
there's enough. There's
enough. Yeah, okay.
Enough for a niche. I mean, remember that also most of the Semillon, and this is why the second wine I put in was a rosé. You know, that's made with grapes that were planted in 1907, and it's a wine that will retail for 12 quid. You know, it's incredible. You know, most of the Semillon in Argentina is over 50 years old. So it's 700 hectares. You know, it's not going to be, you know, like Chardonnay, but I still think it can be something that you could be selling in restaurants and the independent sector as well. I think the Semillon from Argentina is amazing, and there's even more Chenin Blanc. There's 1,400 hectares of Chenin Blanc, and a lot of that's very old too.
Sure. Just a very, very quick point of housekeeping. In the sense, Peter Wallbridge of Enotria he did say to us beforehand, had to dip out for something else. He had a 3-line whip at 4 o'clock, which is why he's disappeared from our screens. But he did tap a thanks and hi to all before he departed. Well, let's just bring that back to where are we going with that? The whites question. I mean, who feels that whites could do more? Are Argentine whites well enough representative represented, and do they engage enough at the moment? And doing more with them, so pulling the consumers in more. Do you think that would be surely an absolutely open door to help them to understand the diversity across Argentina, which is, to get back to our original point. I don't know, what, Charles, do you want to pick that up from, again, the sort of the supermarket, the multiple?
Yeah, I agree. I think the key to unlocking a sort of a more enduring next few years for Argentina will be finding a white that we can make work at a commercial level. I have to be a bit controversial, Phil, and disagree with you on Torontes, I'm afraid. So from a grocery point of view, I think the future would lie more with Sauv Blanc or Chardonnay, and then Torontes would have more of a role to play as we establish white wine from Argentina with the consumer. But there's no doubt that it is red wine in terms of how the consumer views Argentina. But if we can get that to work on both fronts and bring rosé in as well, that should mark a brighter future for unlocking greater varietal diversity, maybe Syrah and Merlot as well on the red front.
Yeah, well, I'm just going to come back to reds in a second, but I have one more comment. Perhaps, Colin, how do through your various dispenses and staff serves and et cetera, how do whites compare with reds? And have you seen any change in that through Vagabond?
Yeah, they are a tougher call to get traction with, I think. It's a really interesting niche, but that's what it remains, is a niche rather than the thing that people go to. For me, you know, Argentina is that really contradictory country, isn't it? Because it's such a hodgepodge of cultures and people put together in this place that you know, it's Italians who speak Spanish and make French wine. You know, if we're going to talk about diversity, if I had the money and I was starting vineyards over there, I'd be looking at anything except the French grapes. You know, I'd be trying Gruner and Albarino and, you know, I don't know, Sicilian grapes and things like that, just to see what can work over there. I think there's still so much untapped potential, perhaps. You know, the future is vastly more diverse than we already have.
That's happening now, Colin. I mean, remember, we have Italian varietals that came with the Italians in the 1870s through the 1930s. So we have, you know, have Barbera, we have Sangiovese, and I agree with, we need to have some more whites as well. And there are white varietals being planted, but again, it's very niche at the moment. But I think they will find. Grenache is another varietal that's being planted quite a lot as well. I think there's a lot of potential for that. But again, it's very niche, and I can see that from your point of view as buyers, that's not right now. That's not really what you're going to be thinking about. It's finding a white commercial wine, something commercial that can be very much associated with Argentina. Thus, my argument earlier on about Torontes being very unique, and you know, that's. But I do think there's some first-class Chardonnay that's definitely potential and traction in terms of the value for money stakes, particularly in the multiples.
It's also as if, and I said to Charles, we'll just finish whites. We'll not finish them, but a couple more comments and then come back to reds. Chris White out there has mentioned Bernarda. Why no mention so far? I mean, large production makes sort of fabulous kind of red fruit driven wines from very affordable, juicy, gluggable wines. I've seen some more serious kind of examples. Charles, you're smiling there. Is that some Bernarda? Surely it's the other, potentially the other big red that is entirely Argentina has ownership of, in a sense, as with Malbec. I mean, it doesn't have full ownership of Malbec, you know what I'm saying? Yeah.
We tried one, and unfortunately it didn't work very recently. But I agree that there is potential with it. I don't think we've got the style quite right yet. It can be a little bit more tannic and a bit tougher. But yeah, there's potential there. I think if we could maybe move into sort of red blends led by Malbec and then start to diversify out from that, I think that could be really interesting. Straight varietal Bernarda at this point for the mass consumer, I think would be a bit challenging, but if it were to gain traction elsewhere first, then that would be great.
Okay, does anyone want to add to that on Bernarda?
Well, the point about Malbec, if you look at cheap Malbec doesn't have a long-term future from Argentina, because you can't You can't make cheap Malbec at a cheap price. Malbec is a, you know, most pickers, most people who pick the grapes, it's all done by hand. Most of it's done by hand. Still, are getting paid double for picked Malbec because it's more tricky to harvest than it is other grape varieties. In the east of Mendoza, we have thousands and thousands of hectares of 100-year-old plus Bonarda, and I think that's a resource that's, and I agree with Charles, we have to find a way with that. Some people have been making them in a more sort of Beaujolais style with carbonic maceration. That's very light and fresh. It can be drunk during the summer from a fridge. I think that's maybe one way we can go, or blending it with Malbec and other grape varieties. But I do think that there is a potential at the lower end to make really good value for money with Bonarda. There are some people trying it at the higher end, but it doesn't have the name yet in terms of like Malbec does. But I do think there's a lot of potential for sort of entry-level Bonarda from Argentina that over delivers on its price, you know, in terms of volume.
I think that's the point, isn't it? When you look at what it's up against, you walk among the shelves and think, okay, well, if Bonarda can hit this price, so it's simply just not really so known at the moment. So I think absolutely the potential's there, and certainly some of the wines I've tried, we just use the word, Phil, kind of they over deliver. If you're looking for reasonably straightforward enjoyment, then you know it does what it says on the tin, and I think you know you can't ask more than that. And there are a lot of wines that don't deliver in that arena, I guess. So I suppose we could sort of move it on a little bit. So we talked about kind of what works, what's still a work in progress. This question, this is where everyone rounds on you, Phil, with an ask or a complaint. But what could or should Argentina do better to assist the trade in promoting understanding the diversity of its wines? So I'm really asking what, you know, perhaps large producers, small producers, people like yourself, Phil, Wines of Argentina, is there more that the country sort of collectively and individuals can be doing that would sort of help you to get the most out of your Argentine category? And I didn't want to open this up as some sort of free-for-all for complaints, but constructive thoughts as to what Argentina can perhaps deliver better. Charles, you're smiling again, so do you want to kick off? Or that was a net, yeah. Let's jump in.
I do have a comment on that.
Yes, actually, yes.
While I was tasting the wines, I was doing a bit of research, and I was looking for information on where they're from, soil types, and vinification, and viticulture practices. And there's literally nothing on that. It's really difficult to find information other than a 2-line tasting note that I can never relate to. So if there's something that will help me to sell these wines, to explain these wines, why they're so special, it would be to have information readily at hand on who grows the vines, where and how are the wines made. But not only are these were handpicked and then the stemmed and then cold fermented and blah blah blah, but touch a little bit on why. You know, if they are using whole bunch, why? If they're using a concrete egg, why? As opposed to a 5,000 liter foudre or just stainless steel tanks, or new oak or no new oak. I reckon a little explanation on why these decisions are taken would help us communicate way better what the winemaker is trying to express through the bottle.
Well, I'm thinking now as well, because I mean, the best thing always is to go and visit a winemaker or the viticulturalist and speak to them in the vines, in the cellar, and taste and understand. With everything that's happened over the last 12 months, I'm wondering, given the cost and impracticality of hopping over to our market from Argentina the whole time, that's obviously very difficult compared with near Europe, say. Whether going forward a lot more can be made of, you know, virtual platforms like this and so on for tastings, and that can really help to bring the winemakers closer to you and also to the consumers. And there have been phenomenal successes, I mean, obviously not just out of Argentina, but across wine producing countries everywhere, as we've all immersed ourselves more in this technology. And I suspect the tail of that is going to be long. you know, which is perhaps one way of sort of overcoming that. I mean, another interesting thing, Phil, are there many sort of groupings of sort of, you know, young, cool winemaking dudes and dudettes, or you know the sort of thing I mean, that you might see emerging out of South Africa, for example, or Australia and so on? Is that something that's sort of on the cards, or we're likely to see more of those sort of splinter groups, if you like, of passionate winemakers?
They are. I mean, we've been quite active in trying to promote this young new generation of winemakers, working from very specific areas of Argentina. But you know, it's I share Nacho's frustration with trying to find the information. You know, no country's perfect, no one's perfect. Argentina is very new to exporting to quite sophisticated markets like the UK and the US, and they have the individual wineries in terms of their communication and websites have a lot of work to do in that regard, in giving information. And I totally agree with you, Nacho. It is extremely.
Just let me interrupt you there. This is not a problem in Argentina. This is a worldwide problem. All the wineries in all the world have the same information in the website. This is not an Argentine problem at all. I didn't want to. No,
it's fine. I'm all ears. I mean, I'm very open to you know, I work on my own in Europe, so you know, I'm kind of I have to try and to communicate this as much as I can through I think doing things like this online and getting feedback. So I like to get feedback from people as to how we can help without massive budgets like some of the other generic organizations have. We have very, very small budgets to do what we can do. So you know, it is again, it's quite frustrating trying to get this across, and I understand that there's a lot of frustration from people who are trying to find out information, including myself, by the way, in getting that information. I spend a lot of time going to websites and seeing what they're doing, and it's a lot of, they have a lot of work to do in terms of communicating that, especially in times of, you know, when you've got someone buying a bottle of wine from an independent, for example, and then wanting to find more information by going to their winery website. And I think the why is very important, and there is not enough why. There is a lot of what, but there's not enough why, and the why is the really interesting stuff. And I can see that Charles here is quite keen to say something, because obviously as a buyer you need to have access to that information as well. I'm really interested to hear what you think about that.
I think just building on what Nacho was saying, it is that there is a sort of a lack of information, and he's right, it's not just an Argentina problem, it's a wine trade problem. There is a big barrier between the customer and the winery, and that barrier is usually thousands and thousands of miles in the case of Argentina, much worse than say with France. But that's not to say that they're any better at overcoming that distance. I think the problem is that certainly in the off trade, buying wine is essentially quite a sterile experience. Certainly in supermarkets, you're walking down aisles of seas of bottles on shelves, and it couldn't be further away from the reality of making wine and being in the wine regions themselves, which have amazing lifestyle stories to tell and fantastic personalities to bring to life. And this isn't just something that's a problem as a result of COVID. This was a big problem before COVID and before we all had to stay at home. Most people don't get out to vineyards and they don't see what's happening on the ground, and so it's hard to relate to. And there is so much technology out there now. How can we bridge that gap and try and bring these places to life for people? Because I think if we can do that, that is going to be massive, and it will completely transform the way we experience wine in the UK.
Well, I think that's yeah, absolutely. And just to bring in a comment from Adam Cacaldi, hi Adam, who was just saying earlier, completely agrees with what you were saying, Nacho. Charles, you're also bringing to the fore. You know, we all love a story, and he talks about bringing, you know, the heritage, the older vines, the makers with generations or not of experience, but all those stories to help build sort of loyalty and commitment to the brand, the wine, the winery, and perhaps, you know, Argentina could listen, I guess, to what's being said here and think, you know, we could actually steal a march on this. And I think with that distance as well, almost counterintuitively, it makes more sense to do that, because there are very real reasons why, you know, it's simply more difficult to hop from continent to continent, north to south, and so on, and vice versa type thing. So just wanted, I'm aware of time running actually, and wanted to bring one or two more questions from the audience, and then I'll ask everyone if they'd like to sort of sum up their thoughts or any other points they wanted to make. So nothing should get missed. But it's Sophie jump, and I think Adam Cacaldi also asked this question a little bit earlier. A question to the buyers. Is the B word had to crop up? Is Brexit an opportunity for Argentine wines? Has it impacted on their interest in non-EU producers? Asks Sophie, and say Adam. So I don't know who would want to pick up on that. Maybe should we begin with, I don't know, Majestic, Joe?
Are there a hospital pass, isn't it? A Brexit question. Oh,
yeah.
I'll try my best. I think probably the slight difference with a country like Argentina versus, say, Chile is that obviously we didn't, and we still don't have a kind of free trade agreement in place. So I think inevitably, you know, vis-a-vis a Chile, there's going to be kind of less press and potentially less opportunity as a result. I think the other big factor at the moment is, you know, we're yet to realise, and hopefully won't ever realise, kind of tariffs or additional tariffs on EU product. So for me, I'm not kind of seeing that yet, but that's not to say that we might not in the future.
And maybe Charles, could we bring you in as well? So I think the buying with the sort of, you know, the power of a multiple, yeah. That's an interesting.
I think at a premium level, it'll largely remain unchanged. It's certainly changed the way that we look at bulk and entry level wines. And Joe mentioned the free trade agreement with Chile, and I think that there's always going to be a sense with this that you chase the money and you go to the cheapest region possible. But if you don't have that brand presence at an entry level, then will people want to trade up as much? I guess that remains to be seen. But I don't think it's going to affect the industry massively, unless, as Joe says, we end up seeing big tariffs on certain regions. But so far, it's all been more or less a continuation of the current status quo.
Okay, and maybe one on trade. So I'm going to plump for you, Colin. Is it making much difference to Vagabond in terms of, you know, would you look at it and think, oh, Argentina might look a little more attractive at the moment? Perhaps it's slightly more difficult getting wines over from, I don't know, say Spain, or is this not really affecting you in any sort of major way?
Simple answer, no.
Right, fine.
No,
yeah, that's good.
I don't think it had you know, Brexit didn't change people's buying habits terribly. I think they're starting to realise perhaps that, well, once we tell people that it's more difficult perhaps to get stuff as quickly as we used to in Europe, perhaps that might have an effect. But no, I think people's tastes are where they are.
Where they are.
Interestingly, Argentina 2020 saw an increase in bulk by 48%. So, and I think that's partly because they had a bulk fair in Holland in February, March, just before lockdown in 2020, and a lot of people bought bulk, and UK did very well with that. So the supermarkets obviously took full advantage of that. I don't think that's long term for Argentina. It's not sustainable long term so much because they don't always have the amount of bulk that is required available. It's only in certain vintages that you're going to get that kind of bulk available at that kind of prices that they've been paying. But Argentina had a very good year last year. We increased our exports by 10% in a pandemic. So clearly people were still very keen on buying Argentina from the likes of Majestic and Morrisons and all the supermarket groups. So we had supply that we could supply with that volume. So that was good. I don't know whether that will carry on. I don't know, but it certainly was very good in that respect.
I think that the reason for that was primarily that Argentina was the best value across the world for international varietals. It remains to be seen whether people will stay, because there are other areas offering better value, arguably, for the UK at the moment. So I wouldn't be surprised to see that switch away. somewhere like South Africa, for instance. But we'll see.
Yeah, but that's the way it's always going to be, isn't it?
Yeah. At that level, it's people chase the cash.
Quite fickle, yeah. Okay, guys. Well, I think I'll begin to wrap up. So, audience, if you want to fire off any other question, you need to be very quick. But I was going to run around the panel. I recognise this could get more difficult as it goes around, and perhaps finish up with you, Phil. But my question, I suppose, is a little bit kind of looking ahead with your Argentine category. What next for you and with your Argentine wines? What are you looking to achieve with it in the sort of, say, near to medium future? And if we can try and take, I know it's so difficult with the chaos of the pandemic and all the disruption, but if we can project ourselves into a clear and calm sort of future. Should we begin with Joe, and I'll work around my screen as it is in front of me. What are you looking to achieve with Argentina? Any changes? What are you looking to push? What would excite you to add to the range? What would help you make it as engaging as possible for your Vagabond? Your Majestic customers. I've just switched you over. Deputy Joe.
New job as well as an interesting discussion. I like it. It's hard to get away from the fact that obviously, within Majestic and within the wider trades, Malbec and Malbec blends make up such a huge proportion of the sales. So within Majestic, that's sort of 90% plus. So, there's always going to be a key consideration over kind of Malbec ladders, pricing ladders, etc. And, for a company like Majestic, we are trying to increase our average bottle price and, take customers up the price ladder with the varietal that is so popular. So that's going to continue to be a key focus, and that isn't going to change anytime soon. I think where we're looking to add extra diversity is around Chardonnay. I think broadly speaking, we're fairly off market already with how much we kind of over index with Argentinian Chardonnay sales. So again, we're going to kind of look to double down on that. And then I think in terms of alternative varietals, I think from a quality point of view, Cab Franc, yes, but I think commercially that's going to remain quite limited. But I do think there's more that we can do in terms of other regions as well, with the likes of Salta, Patagonia, and looking at today's selection of wine, wines from the east as well. So that's where we're going to look to kind of build diversity, I guess, on the existing range.
Fantastic. Colin, I can correctly place in Vagabond. What thoughts your end? What would you look to be doing with Argentina? What would excite you looking ahead?
Well, it's interesting that 10 years ago it was very easy for me with Argentina. It meant big, it meant red, it meant Malbec, and lots of alcohol and lots of oak. And because we group our wines, display them by their kind of style categories, the kind of the way that they drink, that just meant that was a nice shoe in, easy stick in on the big bold reds. Argentinian Malbec's always sitting there. And now we've got this kind of really interesting situation where you can get carbonic maceration styles and no oak and early pick. We ended up talking about vibrant, super light bodied, fresh Malbecs. And so there's, suddenly you've got this kind of, it's not so easy to pigeonhole anymore, but at the same time, that makes much more interesting chat and discussion and eye-catching, kind of eye-opening drinking for people as well. So long may that continue. I really enjoy that kind of breaking out of the genres aspect.
So it's kind of, if you think about Malbec, think again, and you've just talked about it, really excited about all this sort of variety and variations going on. So fantastic.
And then the final thing would just be that kind of perhaps catching on that kind of natural wine wave of the orange things that Phil mentioned. I know that I've had Polpero's rather mad non-vintage Chardonnay things and stuff like that. Those kind of and the actual agriculture and sustainability of the industry is going to be a thing that we'll all talk about as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely fantastic. Nacho, for you at Hawksmoor?
Well, we already have a good range of different Malbecs from different IGs. I already have a Cabernet Franc from Argentina as well, and love it. I've already tried with a Trousseau from Patagonia. So I think in terms of red, we have diversified a little bit on the wine list. Whites we haven't tried, and it's something that probably we'll give it a go. But you know, it remains unknown for restaurants at the moment. So obviously that's in the plan, but it's not a priority, sadly. But I do like the fact that there's a range of different styles to choose from with Malbec and other varieties as well, blends with Cabernet as well. So I'm happy with the diversity that I have in the menu at the moment.
Well, I mean, obviously horses for courses, and it's so extraordinarily different for restaurants at the moment. And I know you haven't even actually, you know, you haven't got outside space to open. So we're looking along. So I wasn't expecting you to suddenly radically overhaul your list. And obviously, the style of food, the fantastic food at Hawksmoor demands, generally speaking, reds. So that's fully understandable. Yeah. So for you, it's diversity within. And okay. Charles, what would you look at Argentina-wise moving ahead?
Yeah, I think Malbec's going to continue to dominate, certainly in the short term. If we can find a way of getting whites to motor a bit more, then that would be great. Certainly getting our existing Chardonnay listings to work. But also we have a wider challenge as a business where we are looking for the next challenger to Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc. And with all the problems we're having in New Zealand, there's a real opportunity for something to step into the fold and start to offer something different for those customers. So it'd be great to be able to put something together on that front. Outside of that, though, it comes back to what we were saying earlier in terms of trying to bring the category to life a bit more for our customers on shelf, and trying to tell those stories better and bring wines to life and give a sort of window into the vineyards for customers that are just stuck at home looking for a story to get stuck into.
Yeah, no, fantastic. So stories, often the answer at the end of the day. But Argentina seems to have more than enough of those stories to communicate and tell. So, Phil, do you want to tell us how it is and what your vision is of the you know, as I think I introduced you as Mr. Argentina. So, and what thoughts after your long experience with this country? Where are we going?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, I'm very encouraged by what everybody else says about the more sort of energetic, vivacious side of Argentina, not just with Malbec, but with other great varieties as well. I think you can also link that to place, as many of these wineries, both old and new, are trying to bring that to life. And so to bring that energy, not just to the great varieties, but to the places that they're from, in the way that people label the wines, especially if you're doing own labels, things like that, giving a little bit more information about the story of where it's from. As Joe mentioned, altitude, latitude, that kind of thing. I also think that this is a little bit less about Malbec and a little bit more about Argentina as a country itself. So in terms of the Italian, the French, the Spanish, all the influences that it's had, the history, telling a little bit more about the history that goes back beyond the last 20 years, I think is something that we're going to be working a lot on. It's a very old wine producing countries. And then there are lots of little niche things like old vines, the fact that most of the grapes are grown by families. It's a very traditional in that sense. And bringing that to life is through the Criollas, for example, is something that I'm very passionate about. Also very passionate about Torontes, as you may have guessed already. I think there's still a lot more potential for Torontes on the shelves, particularly in the multiples, having a great variety that is different, that you only find from Argentina, trying to bring that to life. I understand that it's not an easy grape to do, but I still think there's some way to go where we can do that. I have every confidence that that's going to happen. And again, all these different styles of Malbec being linked to the different places, I think that's the future for Argentina. Malbec will be always, I think, its calling card. And, you know, I don't want to have these same conversations in 20 years' time about Malbec. I want to be talking about Malbec from specific regions and sub-regions and all of us learning how to pronounce them properly. You know, it's not an easy, it's quite a challenge for us to do that. But, you know, also working with the trade, trying to help the trade out as much as we can in terms of education, and because that's what it's all about.
Fantastic. And I think, yeah, I mean, one of my takeaways is it's just been sort of re-impressed upon me how young the story is, how relatively quickly, in fact, it's unfolding, which from a communicator, writer's point of view is fantastic as well, because just like you, the trade, we have stories, we can look, things are developing, and that surely is going to help sort of move things along and continue to generate excitement. And the diversity, I mean, I've been very lucky. I've been to Argentina a few times over the years, and it's just extraordinary, both watching it move on, but also getting that chance to kind of delve deeper into what the country is offering, what it's capable of. And there are so many wines, so many different styles that, you know, we're beginning to see here. We're not seeing, like, we see Malbec as a category. We're not seeing, say, like the Chardonnays or the Torontes or the et cetera, and it's the fabulous Cabernet Francs we keep mentioning. But when you see what there is still to come, I think that just makes it phenomenally exciting as well. So it's great to see a story continue to unfold. And I think on that note, also realizing the time, I think we'll wrap up there. There were one or two questions which we haven't quite managed to answer, but if you want to ping them to me, andrew.catchpole@agilemedia.co.uk, and I'll ping them off to Phil and say another panelist, and I'm sure they'd be generous enough with their time to come back to you. But I think we'll wrap it up. So it remains for me to say thank you very much for the audience, all of you out there. It's such a shame we can't see you, but for your time, your comments, your chat, your Q&A, and for tuning in. Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Nacho. Thank you, Colin. Thank you, Joe, and Phil for joining me as co-host, making it all happen. It's been really insightful, and look forward to seeing you all, hopefully in person, over a glass of Malbec or similar in the not too future.
Or Torontes.
Or Torontes, indeed. We can do both. We can do both in one session. We're professional. Okay.
Thanks very much for taking part, guys. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
All right,
for
thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Good to see you all. Cheers.
Cheers.